Right, hi, welcome to episode 16, I think it is, of the MSK Runner podcast. So thank you for listening to all your previous episodes. Really appreciate the support and really appreciate the feedback. We're going to dive straight in. In fact, before we do that, I forgot to say actually in the last podcast, I got an email last weekend from Lisbon Half Marathon, which is one of the super halves, um, to say that my ballot application was unsuccessful. Being honest with you, having gone to Lisbon the previous weekend and seeing how hilly it is, I'm not overly disappointed with it. In stark contrast, like I'm doing Valencia in October and it's like flat as a pancake. But running up steep hills in Lisbon when it's going to be really warm, it's not the most appealing thing ever. But nevertheless, I'm going to keep applying for it every year until I get in, basically. But you win some, you lose some. Um, Good news is, so kind of like with uploading a podcast, I discovered something earlier in the week called Buzzsprout. To cut a long story short, I don't really know what I'm doing still in terms of like recording and uploading podcasts. So previously, I'd just been like manually uploading them to Spotify and YouTube, and it's a bit time consuming. But Buzzsprout basically allows me to upload them to everywhere all in one go. So you can now listen on Apple Podcasts and a few other streaming services that I've not even heard of, to be honest with you, like Amazon as well. But yeah, that's puts it out to like a bigger audience. I've looked on like my analytics actually, and I've even like had somebody in Ohio in America and listen, which is like quite cool. So yeah, wherever you are in the world, let me know, because it's quite surreal really knowing that like there's people on the other side of the world listening to this. Like who knows why, but quite cool. Um, right, I'll go straight into it. I'm going to talk about nutrition and Slimming Worlds in a bit, but I'm going to talk about something else first. There's, if you've been looking at social media over the last week, you'll know that there's a guy called Steven Bartlett who he's an entrepreneur. He's one of the dragons on Dragon's Den, and he's got a podcast and he's got a big following and presence on social media. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, like one of my colleagues was talking about him in like a positive way, and I said, like, to be honest, I think he's a bit of a knob because he talks a lot of shite. And then literally like a couple of days later, like one of his clips was like doing the rounds and it went a bit viral and he's got quite a lot of stick for it. Where basically he said that like one evening he drank 3 glasses of wine and it ruined his life, not to be dramatic or anything. Um, I'm going to play like devil's advocate. So I think, having 3 glasses of wine on an evening or like, going out and getting drunk, for example, it can definitely affect you like the following day and possibly the day after. So for example, if I go out for a few drinks with the lads on a Saturday night, even like before I get a taxi home, what do you tend to do when you're drunk? You tend to get hungry, so you'll go to the takeaway and get yourself a kebab or a pizza or whatever, like before you get your taxi home. And then, the following day you're hungover and naturally you're kind of like less productive. You're craving like kind of unhealthy sugary foods, and sometimes you might just kind of like um, sit down on the sofa all day and not really do a right lot because you're not feeling very good. And then, you're also like dehydrated and what have you. And then you kind of feel a bit tired as well and a bit lethargic for the next day or two. That is normal to happen when you've had quite a bit to drink, the night before. But, one thing I will say is that I think there's more benefits actually to having a few beers with your mates, for example, because I think it's like, just like having a catch up with your mates is like obviously really good. Um, just a good way to like let your hair down and just enjoy yourself, and kind of like, push all your everyday problems to one side in essence. I think, I think like you don't need to be like serious and thinking about work like 24/7. Like when you're not at work, I think it's very important that you do wind down and let your hair down a bit. It is important to enjoy yourself. For me, like if people want to like give up drinking alcohol for good, that's like a personal decision, and it's absolutely cool if people want to do that. If they want to have a positive impact on their lives. Me for example, like years and years ago, I did used to go out drinking all the time. Used to go on nights out and what have you. Nowadays, not very often. I very rarely drink in the house anymore. For me, like drinking is just like it's purely a social activity. Like for example, I went on a stag do a couple of weeks ago. I've got a couple of weddings in the summer as well. I can't imagine I'll be getting drunk between now and those two weddings. But I think kind of like my point is that there's nothing wrong with like having a few beers or having a few glasses of wine on an evening. Um, I think for Steven Bartlett to say that it ruined his life is like over dramatic and exaggerating to say the least. I think he's as much as I'm not a big fan of him, he's obviously like a very smart guy and a very clever guy, and I think he's kind of used that as kind of like clickbait, um, to get more people watching his videos and what have you. And obviously, like it's done the rounds, but like lots of people have like slated him for it. I just think it's a good timely reminder that like you are allowed to indulge in stuff that's not necessarily healthy. In terms of like drinking alcohol, like for me, like it's very few and far between, and it's not like I'm going out and getting pissed like every other day. It's literally like maybe once in a blue moon. Um, I just think it is important to enjoy yourselves, like enjoy living your life, and you don't have to think about work all the time. It is okay to like not think about work and just like have a social life as well and do what you enjoy doing. And I think it's important that to remind ourselves that we're not robots. We're humans, and yeah, it is okay to have a few glasses of wine on or whatever every now and again. Yes, it might make you feel crap the following day and make you less productive in the short term. But looking at the bigger picture, like if one of my mates like rings me now and say, "Oh, hi Harry, a few of us are off to the pub tonight. Do you fancy joining us for a few?" I'm not going to turn around and say, "Oh no, I'm not going to bother because it's going to ruin my life." Just such a ridiculous statement to say. Um, so yeah, that's kind of that really. I think, when I said that, I told my work colleague a couple of weeks ago that I think Steven Bartlett's a bit of a knob and he's not really to my liking. I do think he talks a load of crap, and that's just like one example. But he has like a podcast where like he'll have like guests on his podcast, and they'll make kind of like they'll make very like bold claims about important things like mental health and nutrition and kind of like various diseases, but they're not actually backed by science. And he just sits there and like nods and smiles and doesn't challenge it. And it goes back to when I was on about Joe Wicks a few weeks ago. Like, just because somebody has millions of followers and a blue tick next to their name on social media, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that comes out of their mouth is credible. It's kind of like unearned legitimacy, if you like. I just think like, yeah, it's very easy for people to kind of like listen and agree and go with it just because, like I say, of like the amount of followers and the blue tick that those people have. But my point is, it's not necessarily true. Um, and he was on about kind of like how I can't remember what the manufacturer of the watch is actually, but basically it's like obviously like it's a sponsorship plug. He's like mentioned like the name of the type of watch he has, and he said that like it ruined his sleep score and what have you. But if it's only for one day, does it really matter? No, it doesn't. Like I say, I'm not gonna when I go to a mate's wedding in the summer, for example, I'm not going to turn around and say, "Oh, I'm not going to enjoy myself. I'm not going to have a few beers tonight because I don't want it to affect my sleep score on my watch." It's just like wise up, basically. I think like I have a watch myself, so I'm wearing it now. Just like a bog standard Garmin, really. I mean, with watches, they do measure like your heart rate, your sleep score, resting heart rate, how many calories you've burned, even like your stress levels and your blood pressure as well, even in some cases. Personally, like I have all of those things switched off. I only use my watch as a step counter because I like to know how many steps I've done in a day, and also to like record my activities. So if I go for a run or a hike or a gym session, for example, I like it to like track what I'm doing so that I can like measure my progress. But like I have like my heart rate and stress levels, sleep score, and everything all switched off because when I first got the watch, I found I was like constantly, like every other minute, like obsessing over it and just kept looking at my watch like that. And I just, yeah, it just became like too much for me. Kind of like sucked into it, and I felt like it just kind of made me like very health conscious, if you like. I don't really like want to think about it. I just want to like live my life and live in the moment. So yeah, like I say, I've turned all those things off. I'm not saying that's what everybody should do. That's just like what works for me personally. So yeah, that's why I wear mine, just as a step counter and to track my activities. And I just think like, when I become like overly obsessed with my stats, when I'm, and constantly looking at my watch, it just like causes me to feel a bit anxious, to be honest with you. And that's the last thing I want to feel. So yeah, I just think it's important to just like enjoy your life and live your life, is the bottom line. And you don't have to think about work 24/7, is my point. Moving on, going to talk about Slimming World. It's been around for a while, and the reason why Slimming World has been around for a while is because it's an incredibly good business plan. Very good for retention and keeping people coming back through the door. But for me, it's not a diet plan. It's not a nutrition plan. Now, I'm going to kind of like play devil's advocate a little bit. People obviously do lose weight with Slimming World, and there have been success stories. So I'm not going to, I'll give credit where credit's due, but I just think it's not educational, and, it just teaches you like a load of bollocks in essence. It doesn't like, for me, like people join Slimming World because they want to lose weight or they want to lose body fat. And again, I'm going to like simplify it. If you want to lose weight, you need to be in a calorie deficit. So you need to burn more calories than the amount of calories you consume. Move more, eat less. Simple as that. Don't starve yourself. And you can still enjoy stuff, but do it in moderation. I think it is that simple. But, with Slimming World, there's no mention of calories or calorie deficit. They call everything sins, which I think is quite a bad word, really, because if you eat something and it's worth like X number of sins, I think like that subconsciously makes you feel guilty about it, and you then sort of punish yourself. And I don't think that's the right way to kind of live your life and go about your day to day business. I think. What's also really bad is that 1 month, a jacket potato might be worth, I don't know, I'm making this up, let's say 3 cents, and another month it might be worth 5 cents. It's like, well, it's the same jacket potato. Why is that changing? I just don't get it. Like, it's still going to contain the same number of calories, so just find like it can be a bit misleading. But there's also like foods that Slimming World classes free foods. So, in other words, they have zero sins, and they class things like fish, rice, eggs, and pasta as free foods. So that kind of like wrongly implies that you can eat as much of those foods as you can, which is obviously not true. If you use your common sense, because if I eat let's say I eat 10 jacket potatoes, that doesn't mean I'm not going to like put any weight on. I'm obviously like increasing my calorie intake. Um, but that's what I mean. It's just like, it's kind of like a yo-yo. Like people might lose weight initially, but then they'll put the weight back on because they don't actually know why they lost the weight in the first place. And then that's what keeps people coming back through the door. When you hear somebody say, "Oh yeah, I've been going to Slimming World for years," like in my opinion, like that's not a positive thing. Slimming World should only ever be a temporary measure. If you keep coming back like years later, then it's obviously not working, and you need to do something different. But another thing that kind of like annoys me a little bit, a lot of you will have probably heard of this. So, like a banana, for example, is classed as a free food or like zero sins. However, if a banana has been mashed or crushed, then that means it has sins. So they're trying to say it's healthier to eat a whole banana than it is to eat the same banana that's been mashed or crushed. And again, for me, like that's a load of crap, because if I put a banana in my mouth and I start chewing it, I'm mashing that banana with my teeth before I swallow it. So somebody please, unless I'm being like really stupid, like please explain to me how eating a banana is different to eating a banana that's already been crushed. Like it's just like absolute nonsense. And that's what I mean about Slimming World, like not being educational. It doesn't actually teach you anything about nutrition, in my opinion. Like I say, people obviously have lost weight and there have been success stories, but I think as a whole, it's not going to like teach you new habits to improve your nutrition, improve your lifestyle, and then once you lose the weight, keep it off. It's designed to kind of like make you sort of relapse and keep coming back to Slimming World and keep paying your subscription, which, like I say, brilliant business plan, but not a good diet plan. Um, that's kind of like my rant over about Slimming World. Ryan actually asked me, what do I like about Slimming World? And that would be like asking me, what do I like about Spurs? I'm really having to scrape the barrel, and yeah, not really going to come up with any positives for that one. But yeah, with I have actually already mentioned this on like a previous podcast that I did like weeks and months ago about kind of like losing weight. So like I said earlier, calorie deficit. How do you know if you're in a calorie deficit? Literally just go on Google and type in TDEE calculator, which is total daily energy expenditure. So it works out like your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories you burn when you're resting all day. And then there's like a scale where you multiply that number based on how active you are each day, and that comes up with your TDEE. And then if you eat less calories than your TDEE, then you're in a calorie deficit. And then over time, your body fat and your weight will go down. Um, Now, another question Big Ryan asked me is, what are the most common mistakes that people make with nutrition aside from Slimming World? I think one is that people overcomplicate things instead of just keeping it simple. Two, cutting out entire food groups, I think, is another problem. So, like, for example, if people want to lose loads of weight, some people think that they have to completely cut out carbohydrates. Now, don't get me wrong, like reducing your carbohydrate intake can help with that, but to completely cut them out is like an unrealistic goal, because like you need carbohydrates um obviously for like energy, like slow release and energy. And you know, when you've like done exercise, it is important to get carbohydrates in afterwards, so you replenish your muscles with glycogen so they recover better. But if you don't have any carbohydrates at all, then your body will end up using reserves such as like fat reserves and even skeletal muscle as sources of energy, which you don't want to do. You don't want to like use skeletal muscle as energy, because then if you lose muscle, then that can like cause injuries and cause you to become like more frail like later in life. So you don't want to do that. Um, but yeah, you obviously, like, don't get me wrong, you can reduce carbohydrates. That's quite a good thing to do. But to completely cut them out, you'll also be feeling like tired and miserable and, you know, just like starving yourself. And yeah, that's not good. And it's just not sustainable. The third one, I think, is like prioritizing supplements over food. So again, like I go back to a few weeks ago, especially like without being like stereotypical, like guys who like want to like build muscle, and there's a lot of emphasis on getting their whey protein shakes and creatine and all sorts of different supplements. But I think like the bottom line is that like your diet and your food and your nutrition is more important than your supplement is just there to support that. So you still need to get your macronutrients and your micronutrients in like through your food. Um, you know, first and foremost, like, and then your supplements should be kind of like a secondary support act, if you like. It should be like food over supplements rather than the other way around. And I think the fourth mistake that people tend to make is kind of like falling for how things are marketed and packaging. So the way like foods are marketed whether it's on adverts or whether it's like packaging that you see in supermarkets, it might imply that the food is really healthy, when in reality it might actually not be as healthy as you think it might be. So I do think it's important to kind of like, if you're unsure, just like look at the nutrition values on the back, or you can use like food apps to like scan the barcodes, and it'll tell you precisely like kind of like what percentage of your daily fat intake or salt intake, if you like, it contains. But yeah, generally speaking, like looking at like certain foods and the way it's being marketed, yeah, it's it's easy to assume that certain foods are healthy, but if you do a little bit of research and dive a bit deeper, quite often actually it's not as healthy as you think it might be. So I think like to answer Ryan's question, they're kind of probably the four most common mistakes that people make. So that's kind of it for me today, really. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And like I say, if there's anything you want me to talk about in next week's episode and beyond, then just like drop me an email or send me a message, comment below, and I will do my best to accommodate that. But until then, thanks for listening and see you later. Goodbye.